This is the Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 5th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool, called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. In these many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed, were laying. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath. The Gospel of the Lord. So in the fall of 2019, a bunch of us from Prince of Peace were on a Holy Land tour, and we got a chance to see this pool of Bethzatha that is mentioned in our Gospel reading today, or at least what's left of it, when we toured Jerusalem. It felt very much to many of us like kind of being in a familiar place, because the transliteration of Bethzatha is sometimes also rendered Bethesda. So we had all these signs around us that said, "Welcome to Bethesda," and we thought, hey, we're home. But in Jesus' day, the pool of Bethzatha was a spring-fed pool of water, and it's very close to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It was a place where John says many sick people with incurable diseases hung out because of the belief that there were some healing properties in this spring. So if you look at an annotated copy of the Bible, you'll see that verses 3b through 4, which are not included in the text I just read, were a later addition that included this legend that explained that people believed that there was an angel of God that would come down and stir up the waters. This was why they thought the water bubbled, and that whoever stepped down first would be healed of whatever disease they had. So this is why people were hanging out there and why this guy was hanging out by the pool. Jesus says, or John says, that this pool had 5 porticos, which are like covered breezeways. And for centuries, biblical scholars debated the theological significance of the number 5. Because so much of the things in John's gospel have some kind of deep theological significance and numbers and stuff like that, they thought, there must be something magical about 5. 5 must represent something, maybe the 5 wounds of Christ or some other kind of thing. But at the end of the 20th century, modern archaeological digs were conducted on the Pool of Bethzatha and on the ruins of the massive Byzantine church that used to sit on top of it for centuries. And the archaeologists discovered that the number 5 signified that there were actually 5 porticos. There were remnants in the ground of these 5 breezeways. It was literally a box. There was a breezeway on each side and one bisecting in the middle. And that was unusual in this day, and that's probably why John mentioned it. But this means that this guy who Jesus encountered in today's gospel reading was literally sitting in a box. And he had been in the box for a very long time. Anybody ever tell you that you need to think and act outside the box? Thinking outside the box means imagining possibilities that you hadn't considered before. It means being willing to do things very differently than you're doing them right now. And it often means ditching a tried and true system, which, even if it's not working for you anymore, at least you understand. And that's why thinking and acting outside the box is easy to say, but not so easy to do. Yet it is essentially what Jesus asked the man sitting by the pool of Bethzatha to actually do. This man, like many others, figured that the pool was his only hope of moving forward in life. It was his box, or system, if you will. And so when Jesus comes along and asks the man if he wants to be made well, the man really doesn't answer the question. Instead, he starts complaining to Jesus that the system hasn't worked for him. I want to get down into the pool, but every time I start, somebody beats me there and gets there first. I got nobody to help me. Jesus didn't ask him if he wanted to get into the pool. He asked him if he wanted to be made well. But the pool is the only system the guy knows. And it was hard for him to think outside the box of the pool, because the pool was a system he was familiar with, and he knew it worked, or at least it had worked in the past. Clearly, this man, somebody or some number of people, had gotten into that pool and they had felt better. They had somehow been healed. And since it was a thermally fed spring and it was probably nice, warm, bubbly water, people probably did feel better, because when I get into a hot tub, I feel better too. So probably somebody had been helped by this water in the past. It was the system this guy knew. Thinking outside the box was hard for this guy because he was tired, frustrated, maybe even angry that the box hadn't worked for him. He tried to find others to help, but he hadn't been able. I don't know, maybe Jesus would? In any event, sometimes you get so emotionally caught up in how badly things are going for you that you can't even focus. At least I know that's how it is for me sometimes. And that seems to be what's happening with this guy. And also, even though he knew that the box was not working for him, it was the only box that he was familiar with. And he just couldn't envision any other action to take. And after all, he was unable to walk. So what else could he do? Where else could he go? But as Jesus begins to have a conversation with this man, he invites him to think outside the box of the pool. And in this case, that means that Jesus invites this man to see an opportunity instead of just a crisis. For many people, that's the first hurdle to thinking outside the box. We're so caught up in the crisis of the moment that we can't possibly see how there could also be an opportunity. Indeed, this guy seems to be caught up in his own personal crisis as he complains that he can't get into the water. But you notice that he doesn't tell Jesus to go away. And so perhaps at some level, he's at least receptive to listening and considering that there could be, maybe, another way. Thinking outside the box for this guy also means that Jesus invites him to focus on the goal of the pool instead of the pool itself. Jesus asks the man if he wants to be healed. That is, he invites him to remember that the goal is really about being healed, not getting into the water. And sometimes thinking outside the box begins with focusing on the goal instead of on the vehicle that you think you need in order to get there. And for this guy also, Jesus invites him to try something which was completely unimaginable, even ridiculous. Stand up, take your mat and walk, Jesus says. It was crazy. The guy knew he couldn't do that, but he tried it anyway. And one of the reasons that this story is considered a miracle is that he surely considered this ridiculous thing to be ridiculous, but did it anyway, instead of telling Jesus just to get lost. And because he did, he was literally able to walk outside the box. This story ends up being read during the Easter season because I think we're supposed to be reminded that often the way of hope and new life is found by heeding God's call to think and act outside the box. After all, nobody expected Jesus could die and rise again. It was completely unimaginable. And yet, the resurrection was experienced by people who could see that God does indeed act outside the box. And often, to begin experiencing hope and new life in our daily lives right now, Jesus invites us also to think and live outside the boxes that we've been living in as well. You know, over the past couple of years, lots of us have had our boxes yanked away from us, or at least the boxes of our routines, the boxes of the way we had always done things, the boxes of our systems that we expected always to be there for us. They've often failed, or they just don't work so well anymore. Thinking and living outside of those boxes has frequently not been any easier for us than it was or would have been for that guy by the pool of Bethsaida. But in our time, in which so many boxes have ceased to work for us, it's increasingly important for us also to listen for opportunities God is giving us in the midst of the crises we face. Too often we get stuck in anger and frustration that whatever pool we've been looking for isn't working like it used to, instead of actually looking for a new way forward. Because after all, I know, at least in my life, many of the boxes that I was living in were boxes that I myself constructed. And I constructed those boxes because they worked. Or at least they did. They worked there for a time. But no box works forever. And sometimes the biggest hurdle I have, and maybe you too, is to be able to say, you know what? I got to get out of this box. I got to stop trying to get back into the old box so that I can be open to whatever the new thing is God is maybe calling me to look for. For us too, it's increasingly important to focus on the goal instead of the vehicles that have brought us to our goals in the past. And what really are we trying to do? What is God really trying to lead us to do instead of just looking for how we used to do it? Even before COVID, I remember a story a while back, maybe you do too, about Kodak. Kodak was this company that was a pioneer in photography, and they got really, really good at it. And as digital photography came into play, they were really, really focused on film, because they made film. And they made the best film. They really did. They made the best film. And, Paul Simon sung songs about it and all that kind of stuff too. But because they were so focused on film as a way to take pictures, they forgot that the goal was actually that people wanted to take pictures. And they got in trouble because they were focused on the pool, which was the film, instead of the goal, which was the pictures. Sometimes that happens in our lives too. That happens for us, and we get so caught up and nostalgic for the pools we used to be in that we miss out on thinking about, right, what was the goal of that pool supposed to be in the first place? And for us too, it's often important to be willing to try a completely new way to live into the goals that God wants for us, instead of, again, trying to get back into the old pool. In this story, and this is maybe one of the problems of this story, Jesus tells the guy exactly what to do. Stand up, take up your mat, and walk. And it works. But for us, Jesus, in our lives, doesn't always make it exactly clear what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to do it. And sometimes, the real goal is to listen for Jesus' promise of new life and forgiveness, understanding that it's really a call to listen deeply, to reflect, to try new things that may at first seem ridiculous, just like that guy must have thought getting up and taking his mat and walking would have seemed ridiculous, and even being willing to fail in order to find the way forward that God is leading us in. Thinking and living outside the box, it's always challenging. And yet Jesus' promise of life and healing remains for each and every one of us. And the goal of life is not to look for some magical pool, but to listen for the opportunities for hope and new life that Jesus is still calling us to. The goal of life is not to set our hope on any kind of pool, but to focus on the healing which Jesus offers. And the goal of life is not to find a way down into the past, but to look for and explore the new ways of standing up and living that Jesus promises lie ahead for all of us.